Well, it's a yogi festival, so actually 10 a.m. is quite late in the yogi world. So that's good. I'm a musician, so I barely made it with a shower, but it's wonderful to see you all this morning. So I'd love to use the first half an hour to just tell you a little bit about my story, my entry point into feminism, into caring about gender equality and music. I may mention the Spice Girls a couple times because that was a very pivotal point in my childhood. And then I would love to open it up to questions. And part of sort of this fourth wave of feminism that we're in, and this intersectional sort of wave that we're in, is about us figuring out a lot of stuff together, and about being brave enough to say a lot of the things that are awkward in a room, or the things that we struggle with. I practice around white men the most. I say stuff and I see how it makes them feel, because a lot of times when I'm with other women of color, when I'm in communities that are a little bit more vulnerable, it's very easy for us to create an enemy. But really that's not how anything gets better, that's not how anything gets better. And a lot of times a phrase like the future is female feels very ostracizing to so many people. It feels transmisogynist, it feels female over male, like we're just perpetuating the same problematic ranking systems. So I really want to start this conversation by telling you my perspective, but actually it would be very joyful if we used this very private and safe space to flesh out some of the stuff that's difficult when it comes to talking about gender equality. Does that sound cool? All right, awesome. Tomorrow's Atomic Living. That's like my more polished talk. So today is like, let's learn together. So I grew up in New York City. I grew up to two fairly traditional Indian parents. They had just moved from Bombay, and they were very passionate about raising their three kids to do good in the world. I was raised, very heavy on academics, but I always was obsessed with music. I was obsessed with TV on the radio, with the dirty projectors, with M.I.A. I was obsessed with the Spice Girls, different times in my life. But I started playing the drums when I was about 8 years old. I had played piano, but with piano, week to week, you'd come in and I would play all this stuff all wrong. The teacher would get so mad. But with drumming, whether you hit the right cymbal, the left cymbal, no one gives a shit, So I was always like, drumming is my instrument. It's more expressive, as long as everything's in time. So I started playing the drums, and I just loved it. I loved it so much. I loved the confidence I felt. I loved the ability to go meet a band after they played and engage intellectually about their musicality, as opposed to just being simply a fan. It allowed me to feel enormous amounts of confidence in the all-girls school I went to, which oftentimes the girl-to-girl bullying could be even worse than some of the stuff we see from the other boys. My drumming was an entry point of understanding myself, my own fierceness, the physicality of it, feeling like I could take up space. A lot of times we as women are socialized to be very small, to ask questions with a question mark. Is it okay if I give my opinion? But I was sitting at the drums as a 15-year-old playing, owning my space and owning sound and making noise. It was extremely empowering. But during that whole time, my parents were still really focused on getting us all into good schools, making sure that we were legitimate children. And so they really encouraged me to go into political science, and perhaps make the world a better place by working in the government one day or working in the White House one day. That was sort of the vision they had. And I ran for school president, all that kind of stuff. I was very good at student government, and so I followed that path. And we love our parents. I love my parents, so you want to make them feel joyful, feel happy. So I applied to Georgetown, which was in Washington, D.C., and I got in and moved out there. And for the first 2 years that I was there, man, I don't know, did anyone go to Georgetown in the room? You went to Georgetown, I didn't really fit in, I was there for 2 years. It was kind of like bro vibes. They don't really have any frats, but for me, I felt like it was kind of fratty. I remember I grew up in New York City. We had fake IDs and all that stuff. We were going to the best parties already, So I pulled up to Georgetown, and I remember noticing a lot of the young women getting ready to go to a party. And it was November. It was freezing outside. And I was like, yeah, you guys are not even, where's your coat at? Y'all are smart. You all got into Georgetown. Where's your coat at, ladies? And they're like, no, but for us to get into the lacrosse house, they kind of check out what you're wearing. And so we got to kind of look like this, but we'll just get in. Once we get in, it'll be fine. I'm always down to try everything once. I'm like, wow, this lacrosse house must have something special inside of it. It really must have something special. So I did the same thing, and I wore some outfit with some Victoria's Secret push-up bra, and I was ready to go for the party. And I pull up, and there's this kid's fucking shorter than I am. It's this kid's yeah, you can come in. You can't come in. You can come out. I was like, this is a farce. So anyway, we all got in. It was fine. We pull up. It smells terrible. You know, it smells terrible. It smells like PBR everywhere, spilled on the floor. You know, it's like the music was awful. That was when Superman That Hoe was playing on repeat. You know, I used to find the iPod and change it. I was like, do you all even know what that even means? Like, it is so profoundly offensive to keep playing that on repeat. I get that it's a dance, but like, I used to find the iPod and play something more wholesome, some like wholesome turn-up music, switch it up. But anyway, I left within probably 10 minutes of arriving. I was like, no, I can't dim my light. I know better. I can afford better beer. I know better music. I don't like all this. So I self-selected out pretty early. And I was very good at school. I did great. I did my political science major. I did women's studies. I also did mathematics, like to really push that South Asian pride all the way. And I was good at it, you know, I was good at it. So those were my focuses. But then when I was a junior, my third year of school, I found this band called Thievery Corporation. Does anybody know Thievery? Y'all are yogis. Every other yogi class is Thievery Corporation. It's like beautiful, down-tempo, like loungy kind of music, sitars, Brazilian influence. It was just so beautiful. And the two DJs who were part of this larger band called Thievery Corporation would play every Wednesday in this old converted diplomat's townhouse in DC. You go in, it smells like incense. It was like the most woke club. I was like, damn, like, I want to party like this. Like, this is amazing. You went up the red velvet stairs. On the first floor was the band. It was like a beautiful brown mahogany bar. It felt like you were in an old townhouse. And this reggae band would play, who was the touring band for Thievery Corporation. And you go another floor up, it was like a patio, indoor-outdoor space. The DJ would be playing all this extraordinary music. And I completely just fell in love, you know. I was so inspired. I felt like such a sense of belonging, you know, because people were from such different walks of life. And so, you know, like anything, one lesson that I would love to share is like anytime I've wanted to be part of the cool kids or like part of a company or part of anything, instead of me being like, how well can I make my resume look, I'm always like, what can I contribute to them to make their life better so that they always want me around? Do you know what I mean? Like, how can we reduce the stress of others such that they always want us around? And so that's what I started doing. I started carrying drums. You know, I would pull up early, I'd help them load drums. I would help check people in. I would sit in the front just watching the band. Eventually they asked me to start sitting in, which as a musician is a total honor. It means they kind of know that you're part of the family and let you come and play drums. I started playing congas. Interestingly, in that scenario, I also picked up that a lot of the women who were there were kind of like hanging out with the band, maybe dating some members of the band. So as a female, if you pull up, like, I remembered I purposely dressed a little bit more conservatively, you know, to send a clear signal. I'm just here to play my music, you know. And you know, that's actually in the spirit of full honesty. Sometimes that's frustrating because if we do actually want to enjoy our own sexuality every now and then and sleep with a member of the band, we actually choose not to, just to be able to be taken a little bit more seriously, you know. It's not fair. It's not fair. But my music always came first, you know. My music always came first. So I remember just really enjoying my time there. And so for a year, I was very integrated into that community. I was basically just at 18th Street Lounge in DC or in the classroom at Georgetown. And I was so joyful. I was so present. You know, I was so present. I was so in the flow. I felt seen. I felt really seen. I would pull up to 18th Street Lounge and just feel like, oh, hey, Kiran, welcome. You know, are you going to play drums tonight? Oh, we can't wait. It was so, I felt part of something. And by the time I was a senior, I had a job there. I would work at their label that they were running out of there, just doing odds and ends tasks. And then I would also play drums every Sunday, sitting in with a DJ. DJ would spin, and I would play live percussion. It was so cool, actually. Like, people would pull up to that night with like a towel over their shoulder, like ready to dance. It was like that kind of night. It was awesome. Yeah, talking about yoga gear, they would like wear like excellent yoga-looking outfits, like really like matching and like the whole thing. Just pull up and just like dance so well. So sometimes in life we pay attention, like, damn, I know what it feels like to be truly joyful and present. I know what that feels like. And I know what it feels like to play the game and do well at a place like Georgetown, but that takes emotional effort that I actually don't want to do now that I know what this other thing feels like. Do you know what I mean? And so I remember having this conversation when I graduated school with my parents, and it was a lot of like fighting and stuff. I was like, listen, I don't want to go work at an internship. I don't want to do all that. You know, I want to go work in music. And moreover, I had done this women's studies major, and I was so passionate and dialed in to analyzing social norms and analyzing gender relationships and analyzing the LGBTQ movement as a way of gender liberation. I was so passionate about that, and I was so passionate about music. And all I wanted to do was use a different entry point, not politics, but perhaps music, as a way to be doing my message. And so I moved out to LA. This was in 2011, and I ended up getting my first job at a record label called Interscope. And Interscope is Kendrick Lamar, it's Lana Del Rey, it's Lady Gaga. I mean, the list goes on and on. It was extraordinary. I was so proud of myself, actually, because no one in my family worked in music. And the way that I got the job was because I was a math major, and I noticed that the digital marketing department was like kind of having a tough time. They would get all these, they would get these big spreadsheets from Spotify and from YouTube, but Spotify had just launched in the States. Do any of you guys use Spotify, iTunes, all that stuff? They'd send digital reports. The label didn't really know what to do with them because it was such a new form of media. So I came in, I was like, listen, I'm a millennial, okay? I know what to do with this. So I remember analyzing patterns in Spotify streams and YouTube views for the label as a way of improving their marketing strategy. And I did that first as an intern, and then I got a full-time job there. So Interscope was my first, was sort of level 2 of like being in an oppressive environment, because every other word is like bitch, ho, this, fuck these bitches, like blah, blah, blah. It's just over and over again. And I'm sitting there analyzing these music videos. And a lot of us come up with maybe defense mechanisms or protection mechanisms. We're like, oh, well, that's just music. That's just that genre, or that's just that artist, or that's just what it is in the world. But I don't know, I'm a Pisces, like I'm hella sensitive, like I don't like all that, you know, I don't want to turn up to the sound of my own oppression, you know, sorry. Like, I don't like all that stuff, let's just turn it off, I don't want that. Well, go find your power somewhere else, don't find it on the shoulders of women who love you, you know, I don't like all that. So I remember practicing my own sense of strength. And in the beginning, I used to get mad, you know, blah, 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 I was 22 or something, you know, I hadn't processed my emotions. And so I'm mad, striking up conversations, become known as a classic like angry feminist, you know, that kind of thing. And it was not effective, right? It's not, the conversation was shut down quickly. It was easy for a larger group of people to just like kind of make fun of me and just be like, do your job, dude, like shut up, it's all good. But what I started to do was intellectualize my emotions. I started dialing into the stuff that would make me mad, these lyrics. I would dial into why it would make me. I used my brain to intellectualize it so that if I were to engage in conversation, I was ready with tools. Instead of just being angry and emotional and like kind of almost about to well up, instead I was like, let me think of how I can explain this as to why it's not cool, you know? And I would start to do that, and I would start to read. I read so much feminist literature just from the classes that I took at school, but also beyond, so that I can highlight and dial into some of the ammo that I could use when I would have these conversations. So that instead of it being a war, it was instead something that we can both learn from. Hey, have you ever thought of it that it's kind of unfair that this music is completely okay to be everywhere, and if we were role reversed it, it'd probably be highly censored? There was a film once called Teeth, you know, it's called Teeth. It's a feminist horror film, and it's about a woman who, after severe experiences with sexual assaults and sexual harassment in her community, develops teeth in her vagina. And so then, as the movie progresses, anyone who does try to cross her boundaries and her barriers, castration, castration. Now, for this team to bring this film to life, took probably 8 years when the film could have been, it's a low-budget film. That film could have been made in like a year and a half tops. Took them several years to bring it to life because the amount of pushback they kept receiving from all the different male teams they wanted to make the movie with took them so long. They had to keep taking the script to so many people. Once they'd get a production company to sign off, they couldn't get a camera team to sign off. The cameramen read the script, hell no, I'm not producing that. So imagine one film that is a fantasy about male castration after a woman has developed it because she's already been severely sexually assaulted. No one wants to make that film. We turn on YouTube and all this stuff, the kinds of films that are shown every single day, horror films about women's bodies being cut up in half, all sorts of stuff like that. Oh, that's just life. That's a no-brainer. It's a similar idea, you know, I was watching Batman, and in the Joker is so profound, by the way. Joker's brilliant, Heath. Joker's brilliant. So there's a moment in the film where he says, you know, if I threaten that I'm going to kill the mayor, you know, if I threaten that I'm going to blow up the mayor's office, the whole city loses its mind. It's crazy, it's awful. The whole city loses its mind. But every single day, there's trucks of people all over the world who are being blown up by our country, and no one even thinks twice about it, either because we're prone to seeing a certain race and that's just how the world works, things like that. We never question when we flip the script. One final example of that is M.I.A.'s music video. Now, I worked with her for a little while, so I'll get to that. M.I.A. has a music video called Born Free, and in this video that was also highly censored, I don't even know if you can still see it, because everyone just tripped out about it so much. She shows a SWAT team searching for white male redheads to gun them down, to take them away and to gun them down. It's a Holocaust type reference. It's very dark. It's very dark. I would never advocate for anything like that, but what she's doing is flipping the script. It's saying, what if we actually turn the victim into someone we're not used to seeing as a victim? How would that make you feel? And so I started intellectualizing my emotions by paying attention to the arts, by paying attention to people who made me question my own privilege, my own existence on this earth. How can I use these same tools to engage healthily and peacefully in conversations about gender equality and about gender liberation? So I started doing that and just practicing in my own way. I'm going to fast forward the story a little bit because I'm very present with you. It's actually really nice to share all this stuff, but I also want to make sure we get time to talk about the future as female. From there, I remember feeling like I wanted to reach my next level of music. I had this side of me that was playing drums, and I had this side of me that was very good at working in the industry. And my boss had an MBA, and a couple other people who I really admired had MBAs. So I started applying for mine. I said, I want to be someone who can actually make an influence on the gender equality side in music, but I have to be a little bit more senior in my position to be able to influence things in the way that I want to. And then I also just want to play the drums. I would look around and be like, damn, I'm so jealous of all my friends who get to go play the bass for Katy Perry or the drums for Justin Bieber or whatever. I would have loved the Justin Bieber tour. Oh my God. I love him so much. He's also a Pisces. He's so beautiful. He hasn't updated his Instagram in 2 days or something. It's been a really tough 48 hours. So I remember telling the universe, these are the two things that I want to make my stuff go to the next level. And I remember M.I.A. was signed to Interscope, and she was about to put out a record. And I know how that works. That means that you go on tour once you put the record out. So in that meeting, after she had left the product marketing meeting that we had in 2013, I kind of made a joke to her product manager. I was like, M.I.A. could really use a drummer on the stage. I've seen the show. Maybe somebody who's female. Maybe somebody who's a drummer, maybe somebody who's brown, fits the part, really has the right aesthetic for the stage. And she actually took me seriously. She was like, all right, listen, Kiran, send me a video. I'll pass it along to Maya's team. And I didn't think she would actually do it, but I made a video and I sent it. Within 24 hours, M.I.A. had hit me back. Are there any M.I.A. fans in the room? Yeah, hell yeah, Paper Planes. Fly Like, that's the main one. That's the one that everybody knows, so I always just reference that one. So M.I.A. hit me back. She hit me back directly to my email inbox, and the title of the email was all caps. It was hi. And then the email body was all caps. It was yo, I love this video. Thank you for sending it. You're a great drummer, but we're not thinking about the tour just yet, so I'll hit you up when we do. Listen, if M.I.A. validates your drumming, I printed that shit out, hung it up near my drums in my studio. I was good. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. It's like fan mail, And I had waited for the Spice Girls to hit me back for so many years, and they never did. So it was a nice full circle moment. It was a nice full circle moment. So that happened. I got into Harvard for my MBA. I remember getting ready to close out my time at Interscope, and I was moving out to Boston from LA. When I was moving, M.I.A.'s tour actually did hit me back 6 months later. And they're like, okay, cool, so we have the tour dates and we want to take you. I was so happy. I was bumming. I was doing nothing in LA at the moment, getting ready to move. I was so happy. So I look at the dates, and the dates are my exact fall semester at Harvard Business School, fall of 2013. And so I look at the dates, I'm like, oh my God. First of all, I didn't even tell my parents that I'm having this whole M.I.A. option. They did not need to know about all that. So I'm looking at the dates side by side. My dad is so happy. He's getting ready to help me move. He's just made. So I'm looking side by side, and I'm like, what am I gonna do? So I talked to a mentor of mine. She said, I know exactly what you should do. I said, what's that? She said, you gotta do both. I was like, do both? How's that possible? You missed 2 classes at HBS, they kick you out. They're very serious. I thought grad school was a joke. It's way more serious. You can't be late. I was 3 minutes late for this talk. They would have closed the door by then, You can't be late. So I remember looking at the dates. And because M.I.A was pregnant at the time, she also had just like one-off Saturday, not pregnant, she had had the baby, I'm sorry. She was a mother at the time is what I meant to say. And she had different dates, just like a Saturday here, a Sunday here. So in theory, it was actually possible. And so I started mapping it out, and I would miss just the amount of classes barely to make it through, you know, just 1.5 classes here or there. And I was able to do both for the whole semester. Wow. So I remember I used to go and tour. We would do like dates in Poland, Japan. I saw so many countries that I never thought I would have seen. And then I would go back and learn at one of the breeding ground of the capitalist patriarchy. But that's, yeah, sometimes you have to go into the belly of the beast to really know how it all works, you know? So I was there. I did that for 2 years. Now in my second year, I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome, you know? So much of my time at HBS was like, so many people kind of otherizing me. I'm like, listen, I went to Georgetown, it's pretty basic. Like this is and I went to a normal job afterwards. Like it's not so, I'm not so different, I guess. And I felt a little bit otherized. I also felt a lot of times when I would be in these group dynamics, I would notice the men would take the leadership role, which is good. It's good to take leadership, that's not the issue. But there's a certain energy where I would notice that they would use their assertiveness to quiet the voices of other people in the group. Instead of using that assertiveness to say, let me make sure all voices are heard, you know? To me, real leadership is elevating the voices of those around you, not dimming them down so that your own voice can be louder, you know? Your own ego can be masturbated a little bit more, you know? And it was a lot of that. And it was very difficult to exist in that environment because I guess who likes to have their voice quieted, who likes to feel like they're not taken seriously, who likes to be made fun of. A lot of times the way men interact with each other, it's also very deprecating to each other. I'm like, what is all that? Like, I don't like all that. I don't want to be part of that, you know? I don't want to, but a lot of times you do feel this need, do I want to fit in and just be part of the culture, or do I want to self-select out? So I definitely self-selected out a little bit. And I remember noticing are there any runners in the room? Runners, yeah, tons. You know, I was in Boston, and I noticed these runners on the Charles River. And it would be snowing, hailing, this is Boston. These fools are still running, okay? All the gear in the world, okay, that's kind of extra, but they're running nonetheless. And I was so inspired. I was like, damn, like that's so honest. It's so honest. And so I started running. I used to run half a mile and say, listen, if I don't make it to the next bridge, I'll just Uber myself home, so what's the worst that can happen? And I didn't tell anybody, because the second you start telling people that you're running, oh, well, what app are you using? You know, how many hours are you putting in a week? You know, when's your next race? I'm like, I'm running to clear my head from all of your competitive energy, and I'm taking my own space. I'm protecting my vibes that are wholesome. This is my run. So I started running. Now, while I started running, I did have two of my friends, and one of them is here today. She's going to perform with me. She's like, dude, we should run the marathon. I'm going to do it in April. It's right when you're graduating HBS. It would be epic. And I was like, okay, well, in that case, I can also still Uber myself home. So this really isn't, it's completely fine. So we signed up. We went out to the marathon. And it was a month before I was graduating. I remember pulling up to the start line. I had raised all this money for breast cancer. I was so proud of it. Got my best friend there, another friend of ours who was running. And I realized right at the start of the marathon course, I was about to get my period. And for those of you who have never experienced a period in the room, let me tell you what you're not trying to do on day one. Let me tell you what you're not trying to do. You're not trying to run 26 miles. So I remember, you know, the thing is that when I was practicing too, when I was running, I just would skip out on my period. Like I would just not run for 4 or 5 days. It was like, it's fine. So when I got it at the start line, I started evaluating my options, like any of us who have been caught unprepared on our cycle. So I was like, you know, a pad, I guess so, but chafing is a real thing on a marathon course. No man I know would put cotton between his balls and go run 26 miles. A diva cup, a menstrual cup, I didn't have one. A tampon, yes, but there's no privacy on a marathon course to like change it out. I think it probably would have been more scarring for me to be doing that on the side of the road. I didn't want like a half in, half out situation. I didn't want the like string like hurting my body as I was running. I don't know, I just wanted to, oh hell yeah, thank you. Damn, I'm just so surprised this talk is going as well as it is without this cup of coffee. Yeah, we keep it real on a Madame Gandhi stage, don't we? So I'm at the start line of the marathon, and I just decide, I'm like, all of this stuff, I don't want all this. Also, there's like juju involved with the marathon. Like, you practice running in the outfit that you know you're gonna run in, like, so that there's no flaws on day of. You know, it was like exactly the socks, exactly the shoes, exactly the headband, everything matched perfectly. I had put Neosporin on my nipples so I don't have any bleeding nipples. Like, everything was like ready to go, except for this, which I was not expecting. So I'm there, and I just, you know what, I decide to just take some Midol for the pain, which my friend did happen to have, bleed freely, and just run. So I decided to do that because in my brain, that actually would feel a lot more comfortable than any of the options I just described to you. And moreover, I felt like I knew it was a radical thing to do, and I kind of loved that. I was like, women all around the world are told that we have to be quiet about the very thing that gives life to the human race. And we do extraordinary things on our cycle every single day all around the world, and we're taught to suffer in silence and to be quiet about it. I also knew that I'm running a marathon. How are you gonna shame a marathoner? You're eating fucking popcorn on the sideline of the marathon. You're like, yo girl, plug it up. Like, you're not gonna say that. Come run 26 miles with me while bleeding, then we can talk. You know what I mean? So I knew there was enormous amounts of power in this run. And bleeding anywhere is a punk rock move, running 26 miles, if you ask me. So I felt enormous amounts of power. We crossed the finish line. It was totally a success. We didn't even stop running once. My dad and brother were there, and that was the only time when I did feel embarrassed, and I ran past them like this. Yeah, like everything's cool, you know? Everything's cool. I finished the race. It was a total success. It was beautiful. My two friends never left my side, and again, my friend Meredith is performing with me tonight. You gotta come and see us. They never left my side, and I wrote about this experience. And I wrote about how I felt, I wrote about the power of the experience, and I wrote about how menstrual stigma holds us back, both here in the developed world and internationally. And I grew up and I spent so many years going to India that I knew in India, of all places, it's such a severe issue that holds women back. That when we lack access to such basic products to take care of ourselves because we don't have the vocabulary to speak about menstruation, it makes girls drop out of school, it makes women be so uncomfortable that they tend to do mostly only domestic tasks instead of going out into the world. And the kind of poverty that we're talking about tends to analyze basic needs according to a male standard, so food, clothing, shelter, but doesn't analyze needs according to women's needs. And it's what Hillary Clinton said, which is that women's rights are human rights are women's rights. That's what she's talking about. When I wrote this story, I had graduated from HBS. I was trying to get some basic job at Spotify. The story went completely viral. The story went completely viral. I was in the Spotify office. New York Times was covering it. Australian newspapers were covering it. The Wall Street Journal, all of the feminist blogs were covering it. Nigeria was calling me. London was calling me. I was on the BBC. I had no idea what to do. I had no idea what to do. And it was a clickbaity vibe too, even though I ran with a lot of power and intelligence around it. It had a clickbait energy. The feminist psycho runs free bleeding marathon. I was like, she sounds dope. She sounds dope. I would want to be friends with her. So whatever, that's dope. So I ran this marathon. I had another moment of choice, you know. I had another moment of choice. And I called up a mentor of mine named Catherine McKinnon, very well-known feminist lawyer who also taught at Harvard for a little while. And she answered my call, and I said, listen, this is what's happening. Do I quiet it down? Do I avoid the phone calls? What do I do? You know, there's a lot of death threats coming at me. Like literally, the kinds of things people are writing on my Facebook are so dark and so rude. What do I do? And she said, you know, you have a choice to either step in and really own this voice that you've been talking about. You've been talking about all this stuff. You have a choice to really own that voice. You have a megaphone to say whatever it is that you've wanted to an audience that's actually listening. And you probably have like 15 minutes to do it. Or you can be quiet and it'll die down because everything moves fast. And so I decided to take her voice and really step into that role and really own that moment. I started reading about why I think menstrual stigma holds us back and shaping my own opinions with scholars who have been in the field. I use a lot of the press to deflect and raise awareness about companies in the space who have already been doing this work for a long time in parts of Africa and India and obviously here in the States. I didn't work for Spotify, I left. I started traveling the world to speak about not only menstrual stigma, but this idea of the future is female, which I'll share with you in a moment. And I wrote my first record. I wrote my first album. And it was a joy to move from the drums and to start speaking about feminism, to start using my platform as a speaker as well as a musician to speak and say the things that I've been saying just to my friends, not to a global audience. And it's been a really joyful 2 years, There's a kind of thing where you see like, there's so many times in my life where I haven't been living my truth. That's usually when I eat really badly. Like if I eat badly, I know like, you're not living your truth. But when I'm like peaceful and present, how I feel today with you in this moment, then you feel like, yeah, you're living your truth. And I always move between those two all the time, as I think we all do. So these past 2 years have felt a lot of that. When I ran the marathon, someone sent me this gift. It was a t-shirt that said, "The future is female." And let me tell you, I received so many menstrual pads and tampons the rest of my life. I was like, good. All shapes and sizes. My period is taken care of. I started giving them out a little more. And I also received a lot of really cheesy feminist slogans that didn't really resonate with me or that were a little bit more angry than I felt in my heart. So I didn't wear a lot of that stuff. But I received "The future is female," and I just got goosebumps. I was like, damn, like, I mean, get a little emotional now. That happens when I'm tired. Like, I was like, this is it. This is it. This is how I feel about my own feminism. This is how I feel about the fight we're fighting today. And even more so, this idea of using menstrual stigma and combating that and actually celebrating our anatomy and the wonderful things we're able to do in our bodies is something that I want this generation to espouse. And such past criticisms of feminism have been that it's an elitist movement, it's a white women's movement, it's a wealthy movement, it's trans exclusive, it's gay and queer exclusive. It had this idea that they used to always tell Martin Luther King in the past, like, us first, then you, us first, then you, which basically means us first and maybe never you, or our intention is not you in this moment. And so when I think about menstrual stigma and unifying ourselves around this, I'm like, damn, if I travel to Nigeria, if I travel to India, if I travel down the street to a high school, we as women, we have one basic thing we can actually all unite under. Each of us have some embarrassing period story here or there, that we can share with each other. And that this idea of us being able to not talk about our own anatomy comes from this notion that we as women around the world have always been valued for our looks and for our sexuality instead of for the very skill sets and joy that we bring to the table. And that has got to end. I think about menstrual stigma and I think the reason why you all don't want us to talk about this stuff is because you're more than happy to put our breasts, our looks, our beauty in all of your music videos and all of your media. But the second when it comes to a period, because that's not like a sexually consumable and joyful and beautiful thing, I think it's beautiful, obviously, thing, we're gonna shame you for it. Put it away, hide it away, pretend it doesn't exist. And that's oppressive. Stigma is one of the most effective forms of oppression because it denies us the ability to talk comfortably and confidently about our own bodies. That stuff makes me so mad, and it's been such a beautiful way to use music and singing and speaking very literally to own my own voice. When I think of the future as female, to me it's a very positive notion of feminism. It's this idea, for me anyway, and I understand that it has a history from the 70s of being quite trans-misogynist, being quite aggressive in its intention. But political slogans evolved to meet the needs of the time, and I've embodied it in my work because I think this is what it means. For me, it means that we honor the masculine and the feminine in all of us. We each exist somewhere on a spectrum, but so much of the time we're always saying, oh, man up about it. Don't be such a pussy. It's this constant misogyny, hatred of what is female in our culture that happens subtly, but it happens everywhere, which is a ranking system that masculinity is more desirable than femininity. And that's what my work seeks to combat. I think we live on a true spectrum. I think that there is such positive qualities that are existing in the feminine energy that we should all be celebrating. To me, the future as female means that no longer will female qualities be subordinated to male qualities. That instead of a guy going up to a girl and being like, or a guy going up to another bro friend of his and being like, yo, man up, don't be such a pussy. Instead, he's like, yo, you should be more collaborative. That's why I like to work with women, you know, or you should be a little bit more emotionally intelligent, man. Like, that wasn't cool, you know. Understanding that vulnerability and emotional intelligence is such an enormous source of strength. Another thing I'll say is, you know, they have this thing of like, oh, women are too emotional. Women shouldn't be in the White House or whatever, you know, women shouldn't be CEO, whatever. All that shit is used against us all the time. Women are too emotional. You see, being emotional on either side of the spectrum is not good. To me, the male equivalent of being too hyper-emotional is being so ego-driven, how we have in the White House today, that all of your intentions and all of your decisions are made as a reaction, as a need to prove something about maybe the size of your own anatomy, or maybe the need to prove something to your peer group, or to exert your power at the expense of somebody else. So we want to talk about women being hysterical and not managing their emotions. Do we have that? Of course. Have there been times when I've mismanaged my emotions? Absolutely. That's part of our own journey to learn how to control ourselves and our emotions and dial into what's triggering us so that we can be our best selves. But the same exists for the men, except that we normalize it. We say that kind of anger and that ego-driven behavior is power. We glorify it in Hollywood. To me, a lot of my work is saying, no, the future is female. If we keep on that path, literally the earth is going to explode. Literally, our country might start to sink. Literally, the kind of corruption that exists right now is because of the male ego pushing us so far in the wrong direction. And I love so many of the men in my life. I learn from male qualities all the time. But I wish that we lived in a world where so many of the men stepped in and said, damn, what can I learn from the women in my life? You know, what can I learn from my girlfriend, my sister, my mom? And moreover, not in a possessive or a patriarchal sense where we say, you know, I'm going to protect you. No, more like, hey, like, you're on your period, like, do you need anything? In the same way, if I was sick, I would imagine a male friend of mine might be like, hey, do you need any cough syrup? Do you want me to run down to the store and get you some tissues? If I'm on my period, I wish he'd be like, babe, like, what do you need? You know, I got your back. What do you need? Normal. Instead of this fear, stigma, oh, it's gross. No. If I have a little phlegm because I've just sneezed, you wouldn't trip out about it. You'd be like, look, I got your back. You got a booger. You know, it's like not a big deal. Yeah. So I have this very positive notion of what feminism can bring to the table. And moreover, I really do believe that the female energy has such healing power. So much of my work, everyone's like, you know, in the music industry, I think in all industries, we're on this colloquial slang of like, yo, you're really killing it. You slayed that shit. You know, people say that kind of thing all the time. I'm on this tip like, you're fertilizing it. You're giving it life. You're nourishing it. So we have that in my band, you know, before we go off the stage, we're like, nourish it, fertilize it, you know, like give it life, give it joy, take care of it, you know. Instead of coming up to the land and saying, oh, how much gold and like, you know, plants can I reap from this moment? How much can I suck dry out of it? No, how much can I give so that the plants keep rising? You know, how much water do I need to give to protect this moment right here? And we need both. We need both. I do think that there's so many incredible things that the men do in my life, but we don't give enough credit to what the female energy brings to the table. So that's what I think about when I think about the future as female. I want to caveat it by saying two more things before I open it up to discussion, which is that a lot of times when I give this talk, we talk about the future as female. The biggest criticism, among many, but the one that I take the most seriously, is this idea that it's trans-misogynist, that it's celebrating anatomy as a definition of what is acceptable to be female. That somebody who is male to female or female to male and wants to identify as woman doesn't feel included because we're defining what it means to be female according to anatomy. To me, yes, we could say the future is feminine, but the slogan is the future is female. I didn't write it. It's the slogan that's caught on in our cultural zeitgeist. And it's up to us to define what it means. I believe that. So to me, the future is female is about loving what is feminine so that any person, no matter where they are on the gender spectrum and on the gender sexual orientation spectrum, feels like safe enough to be their most authentic selves. And then I actually really do believe that by combating misogyny, it's a really effective entry point into combating homosexuality, into combating homophobia, and into combating trans-misogyny and transphobia. Because if we didn't love what was female, if we hate, you know, we don't like what is female, we're so afraid of someone who is male but effeminate, or someone who was once female and is now male, they're messing up the gender hierarchy of things. But if there was no hierarchy, then we wouldn't give a fuck what gender you are. You'd be free. Set your pussy free, whatever that means. You know, it's like, get liberated. So that, I wanted to caveat that. And the second thing I'll say is that, you know, I speak a lot about specifically female menstruation, you know, women's anatomy, our reproductive rights, our reproductive health, because I am female and I understand that walk of life. And I always say, I'm going to show up as fiercely for my body and my anatomy and my rights, as fiercely as I'll show up for your body and your anatomy and your rights. And that in me talking about the future as female, it doesn't mean I'm trying to oppress anybody else. When we say kill the dolphins, or when we say save the dolphins, it doesn't mean kill the whales, When we say save the dolphins, it doesn't mean kill the whales. When we say Black Lives Matter, they come at us with this all lives matter type shit. It's like, no, but all lives are not being gunned down in this country the way Black lives are. So we have to remind you. We don't want to remind you, but we have to remind you. In the same way, when we say the future is female, it doesn't mean female over male or male over female or a takeover of some fembot type shit, though that sounds also not so bad. Just kidding. It means that we live in a world where femininity is valued just as much as masculinity, so that each of us feels safe enough to be our most authentic self. Thank you so much for listening.